About a decade after the end of World War I, the country found itself at the beginning of what is called the Great Depression. Most historians tie the beginning of the Great Depression to the stock market crash of 1929. There wasn't just one cause of the stock market crash, but a variety of economic factors, including excessive debt, inflation of stock prices, agricultural supply greater than demand, and reduced trade due to government-imposed tariffs on non-domestic goods. What followed was a decade-long period of hardship in the United States. People in middle and lower-class families were hugely affected during this time. Many families lost their homes, cars, bank accounts, and jobs when banks failed. Farming families were hard hit, the drop in prices causing many to go bankrupt and lose their farms. Poverty and unemployment increased dramatically. The Great Depression from 1929 to 1939 greatly impacted families and children. Through these struggles, people had to become more resourceful to survive. Not surprisingly, living through these circumstances had an impact on multiple generations. The children of the Great Depression lived with scarcity and discomfort, and impacted how they lived and raised their own children in the decades that followed. Dennis Swanson was born in 1940, and his wife Janice in 1942, so just as the country was coming out of the Great Depression. These are my dad's grandparents. I spent some time with them over an afternoon asking them questions about their childhood, to learn what it was like to grow up in rural Wisconsin in the 1940s. Their parents, Selmer and Evelyn Swanson, and Kenneth and Irene Miller, very much experienced life during the Great Depression, and it impacted so much about who they became and how they raised their own children.
And I was born at home.
Ah.
The doctor came up to the house and delivered me and charged my parents $25. So that was a pretty good deal to get a big fat baby boy for $25.
I also sat down with my great-grandma Sylvia, my mom's grandma. Sylvia Winkleman was born during the Great Depression in 1934, the seventh child of 10 of John and Rose Kunkel. She grew up on the Kunkel family farm in Pearl Lake, Minnesota, the third generation of Kunkels to farm the land. They also ran a lake resort where people from the city came to fish and relax. She described the work ethic that was instilled in her as a child, and the family values around growing your own food, being frugal, working hard, and getting an education.
Well, my two older sisters, we rented boats, so we had boats to rent. And then all summer they sold worms and minnows. So that school came, they thought, oh, good, we can spend our money. They said, no, we have to use it too. They needed the money.
Wow.
And they sure were upset when
Yes.
they couldn't.
They spent
Yes.
all summer and they couldn't use the pocket change.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the story about my Uncle Herman,
Okay.
who was a bachelor, but he was living at home yet. He wasn't old enough to be called a bachelor yet. Somebody was going to cut wood over the hill from him, and they'd pay him 50 cents if he'd come and help them cut wood for a day during the Depression. So they got done at noon, so the guy gave him a quarter for working all morning.
Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s included relief programs dedicated to helping farmers. Roughly 750,000 farms were lost to foreclosure and bankruptcy during the Great Depression.
When Roosevelt started up the Farm Bureau, the banks had foreclosed on all the farms because they couldn't pay for their payments. And so the banks had all these farms sitting with nobody farming. And Roosevelt said, well, we got to get people farming again. The country's going to go broke. So he started up, the government bought the farms from the banks and sold them really cheap to the farmers and financed them to get them farming again. And I think half the people or more in my neighborhood over there got their farms through the Federal Land Bank.
The
Farm to
two
the
uncles
banks.
lost both their farms, and we managed to keep our farm because the credit union paid the money and we paid the credit union. They could still, so they didn't starve like people in the city who really, and we had enough cows, so we had milk, we had meat, but they were frugal.
And brothers and stuff
It,
too.
it really influenced how our parents taught us.
I don't know how long he'd had it when they foreclosed on him. And we had a neighbor who was a relation to my dad, and he lost his farm in foreclosure, and he didn't have any place to go, and he had 3 little kids. And an old bachelor had some farms, and he told him that he would give him the farm if he would feed him the rest of his life. So he did. He'd go for it. Well, he had nothing. He didn't know where he was going to live. And then they fixed a shack for the guy across the road from him. 3 meals a day, he showed up and ate with them.
It was a drought. Along with the Depression, there was a drought. And
How long did the drought last?
I think a good 2 years, I think 32, 33, I think by 34 it was starting to get better.
And my mother's older sister was a school teacher, but she was never married. And here the banks closed in 1929? They took all of her money, and she never kind of recovered from it.
There are 2 general theories around how the Great Depression impacted the kids who grew up during that time. One is the belief that those young people were left damaged from physical and psychological trauma that they endured. And others believe that the experience strengthened their character, gave way to America's greatest generation.
I think it made a big difference what family you were from, because my dad, he never talked about the Depression in a negative way. You know, my mom would not talk about the growing up years. She never shared anything with me about growing up unless she'd cry. She'd cry. So she very rarely talked about it. So, so talk about people that had it influenced or it was negative on them their whole life. Mom was one, but Dad wasn't. Isn't that strange? And they lived in the same community and stuff. But
That is interesting.
I don't think the people like my parents and stuff, I don't think they ever got over the Depression. They lived their life like it was the last dollar they were ever going to see, because they'd been without money, and they had no ways to get any money.
We were workers.
Yeah.
Donna liked to work inside and cook, and I liked to work outside. So I did more garden work, and I also got to drive the tractor for if they were baling straw. Well, we didn't bale straw in those days. You made shocks. And so I would drive the tractor. So
The Depression, what was it?
what?
Wear it out, use it up, or
Oh, how does that go? Use it up, wear it out,
go
make it
without.
do or do without.
Children's experiences varied widely during the Depression, but despite the hardships and difficulties, stories are filled with so much love.
That's what it is. And mother talked about walking to school in the wintertime, and she had stockings that wouldn't stay. And she was walking with her older brother. Stockings that wouldn't stay up, and so she'd have to keep stopping because whatever was supposed to hold them up didn't work.
Yes.
And so stopping to pull up her stockings, and how mad he'd get because he was trying to get to school on time. Yes, and then the mittens had holes in them, and when they get to school, her little hands would be just like frozen, and the teacher would have to take her back to the stove and rub her hands over the heat and stuff to get her hands thawed out, working again. And she had shoes that had holes in the bottom, so they put cardboard in the bottoms of inside the shoes.
I think she was the one that worried more. She worried more about finances, and she was the one who probably saw to it that we were frugal.
Yeah.
But she used like hand-me-downs, and that made new clothes. And she made quilts, she made rugs. It made them very careful of how they spent money. I think that especially Mom. Well, Mom kind of handled the money because Dad was a little more relaxed. He didn't get too upset. I was kind of a pet of my father because if he went someplace, boy, I was in that car.